anybody there?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, good. Matthew, how you doing?
I'm not bad. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Let me just get the camera going.
Cool. I was gonna say I'm looking for a good spot. We recently sort of moved, and there's not an excellent spot to do this.
Okay.
And I had a spot, and then my mother-in-law showed up, so they're down there with the kids and stuff like that. So now I'm upstairs, but
Hey, no worries, no worries. This is very low key. You sound really good, and as long as you feel comfortable there, that's totally cool. So how's everything going? You're over in Vermont, is that right?
yeah, we just recently moved. I've lived in New Hampshire pretty much my whole life.
Oh, okay.
We just recently moved, across the river.
Oh, goodness. So that's still kind of like your main area, sort of an area that you're familiar with, right?
Yeah. We didn't really, we moved like 20 minutes away, basically, is what it was. It's actually closer to her job and about the same distance to mine, so it's fine.
So it kind of worked out. Okay. Well, man, I'm really excited to get to chat with you about your work. You're an educator and a writer, and you're doing a lot of cool stuff. I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit more about how you get started in the world. Tell me about your home turf. Tell me about New Hampshire, Vermont, and where you find writing, when you find writing.
Cool. Yeah, no, and I think the interesting thing about those questions is they all kind of pull together into one entity in a sense. Um, so where we're living currently is really about I don't know, about 10 or 15 minutes from where I grew up, actually, which is kind of cool. Like I said, just across the river. And I find that a lot of my writing, not all of my writing, but a lot of my writing centers around or has a sort of natural component to it. And I grew up on a farm. We never like milked the cows or anything, so it was more like a meat farm or whatever. But it's like a farm, and we did like haying and stuff like that. So I think sort of all those kind of natural, kind of either animal or nature or plant or whatever, that sort of stuff kind of plays into my writing in different facets, which I think is pretty interesting. I always enjoyed writing from a young age. I was scribbling stories and stuff like that. I always used the Turner phrase like spiral bound notebooks and stuff like that. Writing novels in spiral bound notebooks and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's kind of where it starts for a lot of people. I remember, like it was probably sixth grade. I think one of my friends and I, both were doing that. Basically, we'd have these notebooks and we just fill them up with stories and then kind of bounce ideas off of each other, and then different people from the class would want to read the next chapter or whatever it was. And it's, I don't know, it's a pretty interesting process. And then, I'd say all the way up through, high school, I wrote like a pretty terrible novel I still have saved somewhere on my computer. And it just kind of, 200 pages of, what I would call terrible right now. But like, at the time I thought it was pretty good.
Do you remember what it was about? What you were into, or maybe
some
writing
sort of spin-off horror, some sort of psycho killer sort of thing like that. I was very into Stephen King, and I still am. He's still one of my favorite writers. And so it was definitely had kind of that sort of vibe to it. Definitely somewhere maybe on the back burner. I don't know if I'd use the whole thing at all, but maybe chop up some turn of phrase or something like that here or there, whatever. Scrapyard for parts or something.
Right.
I took a couple writing classes in college, and then I'd say after college, just, between working two jobs and, hanging out with girlfriend, now currently wife, there just wasn't a ton of time for writing.
Yeah.
So I sort of left it for about 5 years, to be honest. And I'd write, kind of very, very, let's say inconsistently, very, very inconsistently, like almost never. And then picked it up pretty heavy back in 2021. And that's sort of when the current sort of, I don't think it's a phase now, but like the current,
the Matthew Renaissance.
Yeah, the Matthew Renaissance.
I was going to say Matthew Sans, but it sounds, it still doesn't jive. It doesn't work well.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Yeah, pretty much everything, that, anybody's read by me was written, let's say October 2021 to now, basically all that stuff was written in there.
Yeah.
So it's just been kind of a burst of energy, and it's still, thankfully, still going.
Yeah,
But
that's a wonderful thing because this is something that I'm very interested in, which is the balancing act. And sometimes by balancing act, I mean we have to step away from the creative pursuit for some number of years or some time because we have to get some things squared away, especially with a partner, with a family, with careers or jobs. When you were going to school, you said you had 2 jobs. What were you doing in that time?
through college and stuff, I'd substitute teach. I mean, pretty much all I did there. That wasn't exactly what I was referencing, but after college, my wife right now, and I had been dating for a couple of years, and I didn't see myself sort of like moving out of the general area because she was ingrained here. We were both
Mm-hmm.
ingrained here, and she was currently starting up school after a prior career pursuit. So I applied for a bunch of teaching jobs in the area and actually didn't get anything.
Mm.
So then I was a paraeducator, sort of in a kindergarten room, which was completely different from what I went to school with, for, because I went for secondary education, like middle
Okay.
school, high school, English, basically. And then I was a para in this kindergarten room, and it was more about like tying shoes and wiping noses and stuff like that.
More foundational things, as they would say.
Yeah, most definitely. So I worked there during the day, and then while she was going to college classes, she was doing hairdressing on the side, which is what she initially did right after high school. She went to beauty school and did that. She was doing that at night, so I picked up an additional job as a pizza delivery guy.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah,
did
you
that
were
for about
grinding. You were doing
about 3 years.
the work. Yeah.
Definitely some interesting stories came out of that, and then I worked in the kitchen at Longhorn too.
Mm.
There's definitely some sort of let's say flex and stuff like that sprinkled in from those jobs into at least one of my books. I don't know, the second one I guess wouldn't be in there, but
Yeah. So actually, this is a good moment to talk about that first book, which was Daydreams, Obsessions, and Realities, right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
were you working towards this book at the time, or is this something that came to you much later as part of this Matthew Renaissance?
It's so funny because I think one of the other sort of like sentences or whatever I gave you is that I just work on like a bunch of stuff at the same time pretty much. And when I had this sort of like, let's say like huge spurt of ideas, I just started writing down, all these stories, and they were just kind of spewing out of me, whether it was, 3,000 words one night, or,
Mm.
1,500 another night, or whatever it was. And then I just, edited them all. And then I finally had this huge chunk of stories, and I'd never really submitted anything anywhere. And then I started showing them to my wife, and she's like, "These are really good. Why don't you send them out to somebody?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess I'll try it out. Might as well." So then I sent them out, and started getting some acceptances and stuff. And that's where I started kind of jigsawing the ones together that went together and
Mm.
stuff. And some of the, I don't want to call them collections because some of them aren't done, but some of the things I was working on at that time are still kind of in progress. The interesting thing about Daydreams, Obsessions, Realities is because it has kind of like a looser, I still see it as an arc in a sense, but it has like a looser sort of collection of pieces than, say,
Mm-hmm.
my second book, because that follows a set of narrators, and it
I
sort of
see.
tells one story through like 5 narrators. I mean, I saw that book actually being like the first one that was going to get finished. And then it was interesting that I had this whole collection of stories. And I was like, I kind of see some common themes. And like I said, kind of like a loose plot arc in a sense.
Mm.
Some people might find that in Daydreams, Obsessions, Realities. And I really like the concept of pulling in a little poetry in a sense to kind of, I don't know if it like fills in the gaps between this kind of, like I said, sort of abstract plot line, but
Yeah.
I kind of liked it better with the poetry than just short stories, because I had assembled it both ways, and it just felt better to me as a hybrid collection than it did just as a collection of short stories. And I don't know if that's just personal preference or you know
Right. And just to clarify, we are still talking about some ideas that came to the first collection and
yeah.
maybe leading on to the second one as well, right? Which is your latest work. And I believe that one is Oil Stains Like Rorschachs. Is that correct? That's
Yes,
the
yeah,
brand new
exactly.
one.
Brand new, yeah, November.
Okay.
Yeah, so October, like I said, October 2021, I just sort of, started throwing all these ideas on paper, basically. And then I still have the document, additional stories to be completed, basically. And it just has a whole bunch of like, one sentence, two sentence ideas that'll turn into something eventually.
Mm.
So I was just, kind of whatever one I wanted to work on, I'd work on, this story or that story or whatever. And Oil Stains is still a collection of, it's short stories, poems, and it also has art from Cody Sexton too, the managing editor of Thin Slice of Anxiety there, also the one that published the book. But a piece in that book may have been written in, let's say like early December of 2021, and then I was busy sort of like assembling that prior to sending it to him. When did I send it to him? It must have been March 2022, I guess. So the pieces were all kind of written in a 4 or 5 month span. It was 2020, I think, was when I started the whole writing train, I guess, not 2021, because Daydreams was published in 2021. Sorry, get my timeline mixed up there.
That's good.
Yeah, so I mean, I still have a couple other collections too that are kind of have been all filling in the gaps, kind of, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
With different stories and stuff like that. But Daydreams, I saw it when I put it together. I sort of saw, like I said, this abstract arc. I saw some common themes. The stories all just seemed to work well together. And then, my initial draft, I had one additional story, and then I had my wife read through it, and I was sort of hesitant about the one story being in there, and I didn't know if it belonged. And she said the exact same thing. So I was like, oh, that's what I was thinking too, and just axed it. I really like the story. But
so let me ask you this, because I have so many questions that I want to ask you. I'm trying to keep track of a couple of things, but the first thing that I want to ask you is, was there something going on in your life that you look back on that collection, you say, maybe this is the through line that was going into the stories from my life? Was there something that you felt was working its way into the work that maybe subconsciously was giving it that framework, or do you not think like that? Do you think it's more methodical or maybe more structural? Like, no, this is just what feels right rather than a subconscious release of something that's happening in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of probably a combination of both. I mean, I've always sort of stood by the concept of, even if the piece is, let's say, as far into fiction as you can go, as far away from our sort of like normal reality as you can go, say like something super hardcore science fiction or whatever you want to put far away from reality. I still think that there's, fragments of truth in there, and so with anything I write, I feel like there's something personal in there, whether anybody even sees it or not, whether it's, a theme one of the narratives dealing with, whether it's, like I said, a setting, whether it's, characters that are, pulled from, fragments of them are pulled from, people in my life or myself or whatever. So I think that, with what you're saying, sort of like a kind of like a driving plot line through. I mean, I definitely think that a lot of the stories deal with change in there. And I think that, everybody was sort of dealing with change when the pandemic came around. So I think, maybe that's why a lot of that writing kind of came out like that.
Yeah.
I mean, we also, fortunately or unfortunately, sold a home like right before the housing boom, like right before the pandemic thing there.
Ooh. Wow.
And then we're in the process of buying, but couldn't really find anything. So we actually moved in with my mom for a while. So we had like that change. And then we were there for longer than we intended. So then we moved into an apartment. So it was like all this kind of change, over, the span of, let's say, like a year or two. And I don't know if that was what eventually jarred all the writing just in general, just this concept of, not exactly being, I mean, we're still in our everyday in a sense, but like, the location was changing pretty frequently, let's say.
Yeah, and having experienced something similar to that, those are massive changes that really test you as a person. And if you take on the, I guess, the personality or responsibility of a provider or whatever, there's a lot of feelings that might come from being in those situations. So definitely, I can imagine that being a point of maybe, I would say not stress or something like, there's some psychological stuff happening here, but rather just something that you need to express and let out into the world. And then it takes on this other form, like it transforms and becomes this beautiful collection. But the curious thing about this, and I want you to expand a little bit on this idea of using different forms to bridge together a narrative or to bridge together something that fits, because this is really interesting to me. I'm attracted to this idea of poetry and flash fiction and maybe other forms working together to create a cohesive thing. How do you arrive at that? What's the thing that draws you into that? If you could expand a little bit more.
When I initially sort of went on, this like whatever renaissance or spurt or whatever it was, with the writing, it was initially almost all fiction based, which had been pretty much my MO anyways. When I was doing writing, I'd written some poetry, in college and stuff like that, and I never felt like it was very good anyways. So going from just primarily fiction and then just having some ideas that I thought would be expressed better in the poetic form, I think that's kind of where it started. So then I ended up arriving at some of these poems that I really like too, and then you have the pieces of fiction and the poetry, and they all sort of kind of drive at similar ideas, I guess, was my initial concept. Kind of like walking through like an art gallery or something. You might have different types of art there. You might have some realistic, some expressionist, right? Some, abstract or whatever, but they all might drive at sort of similar concepts, if that makes sense. So when I started to assemble the collection, I think when I assembled the initial hybrid collection, there was a sense that I wanted a storyline, kind of, even though the stories didn't all have the same narrators and didn't all have the same sort of like setting and all of that. So I kind of wanted a storyline, and that was my initial thought process in weaving in the poetry, because I felt it gave it like sort of an abstract sort of ambiguity in a sense, to kind of, I don't know if it was sort of smooth the lines between the stories or how you would put that. Do I think the collection would work without the poetry? Maybe. I think I do definitely like it better, like I said, with the poetry. But and then to sort of expand on that, I really like the concept of pairing art with words, even though I myself am a terrible artist, and at least in my own perspective. I think that it was a really cool process for me to send a collection to Cody with just words. And then he takes kind of like a general idea of what I was thinking for the art, and he creates these cool visuals. He's taken a couple, I think, pictures and put them online. I could probably flash a couple of them to you.
Yeah, sure.
So, the second collection sort of centers around a mechanics shop, and this guy, Brooks, and he sort of takes in a sense, like wayward youths, and kind of acts as like a father figure in a sense, which I think ties closely to teaching too. And I think that maybe that's sort of what draws those, obviously parenting and stuff too, I think, but knowing that I work with like a lot of, students between, let's say like the age of like, 15 and 18, like a pretty vulnerable, I think, age. And a lot of like the narrators in a sense have an aspect of that high school age in them. I don't know if I'm veering from your question, but I like the
perfect.
concept of, I like the concept of his art enhancing the words that are already there. Like, I like the stories and I like the poems. And in a sense, I feel like the poems add an abstract sense to what the stories. Yeah, the stories have abstract nature to them too. But I feel like the poetry kind of frames the collection in a sense. And then you have the stories that tell most of the actual kind of like physical plot and about the characters and all that. And then you have his art, which is sort of like his interpretation of the stories, which I think is really cool. So I don't know if that really answers the question up, but
but it does, but it opens other questions that I'm interested about. And for a moment, I want to ask you about the way that you're processing a lot of information. I think I really feel like you're kind of on a similar wavelength that I usually am, which is you're looking for things that will stick. And so you're actively sort of throwing things at the wall and then maybe cataloging them or in some way or feeling to see what's actually going to land to become something else, like a story or a poem or something. Could you tell me a bit about how that process works for you? If you could share some thoughts on that. How do you make this stuff exist, especially when you have other stuff going on in your life? What's the thought process now that has made you so effective in 2021 onward rather than what came before?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, a lot of it is just a matter of actually putting stuff to paper. I feel like I mean, I could be completely wrong about this, but I feel like I always had like quite a few ideas, and then so wanting to tell stories was always pretty natural to me. That's why I'm so surprised that I had that like 5 year gap where just I guess there was just absolutely no time,
Mm.
really. I mean, I feel like I have pretty little time right now too, and I'm still fitting it in. With I have a 4 year old, and then I mean she's almost four, and then the other one's like almost 1.5. So it's like
Oh,
super
yeah.
busy, and then with school and grading and all that sort of stuff, I basically just people ask me when I have time to write, and I say I just don't sleep. You know.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna stop you right there because you mentioned your kids are that young. When my child was about that age, I don't remember a thing.
Yeah.
I had a job and obviously raising just one, and that alone seemed like I don't even know where I am half the time. And so for you to do this, I think it's a testament to the willpower that is necessary to make things happen and bring that forward, because that is like, the more I talk to people, especially the really busy ones like yourself, that's like the only thing that matters is believing that you can sort of overcome certain things. Not to say that you got to hustle, 24/7 or whatever, but sorry, I didn't mean to interject, but it just feels like this has to be said. Sometimes you just need that little extra push to manifest this stuff.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Like, I just didn't. I mean, and maybe it was a maturity thing too,
Yeah.
because as I said earlier, I never even really submitted anything. I did submit after writing two short stories in college. I submitted each one to one journal, and then they got rejected once, and then I put it on a hold as far as the submitting stuff goes. And I hadn't read enough about the submission process, and I was just I probably sent them to, I think they were probably like really big magazines or whatever too, and
Mm-hmm.
and the stories, looking back at them now, weren't as polished as the stuff that I'm writing
Yeah.
now. I mean, or whatever.
That's a really good point too, because just two things real quick. There's so much growing that happens when you become a parent, and it sort of puts things into perspective for you. You get a kind of clarity, and there's nothing wrong with like taking a break. And if you're a parent, or you're providing or taking care of another human being, other than yourself, that's a huge revelation. And like your brain is reshifting and changing in a lot of ways. But I think that once you get to that point, it's almost like you are clarified on the things that you have to do, and suddenly you get this energy that revitalizes where you need to go. And I think that same thing happened to me in many respects, that like you have to study how you can refine things a bit better. And so I'm curious of the process that you took in learning how to submit, how to be more effective in that way, because there's just less time, right? Like,
Yeah.
when do you start submitting, and where's the trial and error? I guess that's where I'm getting at with this.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it might even come down to the vote of confidence from my wife too, with like,
Yeah.
oh, I really like these pieces. You should try sending them somewhere. So then I was, a little bit more confident, because it wasn't just me that was confident about the stories. Then, maybe
Mm-hmm.
she, I mean, I was really liked my work just in general. And even one of those pieces that I sent out to a magazine way back in college, I'm going to say severely revised version, is in Daydreams. And I really like the new piece much better than what it was before. But I think that sort of having somebody you can trust as far as a first reader is beneficial. Not everybody can have that, and I've said this several times before too. Either it's in passing to people or whatever, but she doesn't always like all my work. She's really honest with me, and sometimes she's
That's the
just like, I
best.
really dislike this piece, and
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, let me know more. What do you think? Why do you think that or whatever? And then we can try to, unpuzzle where the piece could go. And then sometimes we just disagree, and I just keep it the way it is and then still send it out that way. And there have been times where I'm like, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I think I should, rethink this piece, and I'll rework it, and then I'll, hand it back to you and see what you think or
Yeah.
whatever.
It just
And
goes to
sometimes that works
show,
well too.
yeah, it just goes to show how important it is to have that second perspective to help you push things along, or to maybe push up against in some respects, to get the right form into the story, to make sure that you get that confidence. But I want to ask you why some people just completely loathe their work and why others are enamored with their work. I mean, I feel like I just fall in love with my work and what I have to say. And sometimes that's the hardest thing, to get outside of my own head and stop really believing in my own, like, as they would say, I get high on my own supply all the time. It's like my favorite thing to do, because
Right.
it's a release, and I really enjoy that. But how do you find the balance for that without feeling precious about anything, and just enjoying the writing, enjoying the work that you have in front of you, and then when it comes time to actually tear it apart, move on to that aspect of it without feeling like, your child is getting destroyed in front of you?
Yeah, that's like that whole kill your darlings thing, right? I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
um, yeah, I feel like that, that was a pretty interesting process with a few pieces. Especially, sort of like whittling a couple of them for collections and sort of like kind of retooling them for collections. And then actually, I'm taking a piece that was published in one of the collections and sort of like kind of taking like the concept, or the basic concept of the idea, and expanding upon it currently. And I've got
Mhm.
about 30,000 words. So it's kind of like working toward more like a longer piece. Actually, I haven't really
Mm.
written anything longer in like a long time. Sort of like the general concept. It's a little bit sort of left the center from what was actually published, but
Uh-huh.
um, yeah. So that's sort of interesting too, because I'm finding that pieces of the initial story that I really liked and that was published online with a magazine that I really like and stuff like that. I'm just sort of ripping them out because they don't fit with what I put before them.
Mhm.
Sort of like when reworking the storyline and sort of expanding upon it and stuff like that. And then there was a piece that sort of I really liked where it sat, before I put it in oil stains. And I took out like 2/3 of the story just because I felt like, in the collection, the length of it was slowing down the collection in a sense.
Mhm.
So that's sort of my thought process with that, is it's
Yeah,
been, I guess,
yeah.
more shifting stuff when moving it closer to, so say like book length stuff. Interestingly enough, most of my stuff, unless it's like the current thing I'm working on, which is like super long, but like for me at least, most of my stuff comes out in like one sitting, and then
Mm.
I'll take like one or two more looks at it, and then change a few things here and there. Generally, not drastic changes in my opinion, and then show it to my wife, and that's pretty much where it goes. And then it'll go out to publishers. So there might even be times where I write a story, one night, if it's super short, like say a micro or something, 300, 500 words or whatever, like it the next morning, I might show it to her the next day and then send it out that night.
Oh, it's
To
awesome.
be quite honest with some of the pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there'll be other pieces, 5,000 words in a night or something, and then just kind of retool it the next night or whatever. And then show it to her,
Yeah.
and then send it out, or place it in a, a text or whatever. Yeah, but I definitely feel like you're right on that, because sometimes you get so caught up in your own storyline in a sense, and you're
Right.
like, I really understand what I'm doing with this, but does it actually fit? Kind of.
Yeah.
And that was the hardest thing about cutting that one piece from Daydreams, is because I don't like to say this one's one of my favorites or whatever, but like, I definitely liked the story, and
Mhm.
she liked it initially when she read it too, and it was one of the earlier ones I wrote in whatever it was, 2020 or whatever. And I really like the piece, and I was like, but I just don't think it fits, in the sort of abstract storyline or whatever. So I
Yeah.
just cut it. She felt the same way though, which I thought was pretty interesting. So it's still kind of hanging out on my desktop, waiting for a different collection to fit into or whatever, waiting for the right spot to fit.
Or to get sent out into the world again. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually published. That one was actually published online. The publisher is now defunct, though, so
Oh
it's
no.
actually nowhere online.
Darn it.
Which is unfortunate. And people seem to, the people that read it seem to like it too, which was cool. But
Oh man. We'll have to check that out. Once it makes its way once again into the
yeah, no, right.
the world. So just got a couple more questions to be mindful of your time. This has been awesome, man. And I really, I dig what you're doing and your work. I'm really curious to know if there is a component in your education that you feel like you gotta get out of your head before you can start writing. Like, I know it's difficult to compartmentalize, but do you think that's necessary to get your writing done? Or as you said, I mean, there's a lot of through lines that come from education that make their way into your work, whether it's like on purpose or not. But do you wish it were different, or do you accept that it is what it is and you don't believe in compartmentalization? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, okay. So compartmentalizing, like, say, teaching during the day versus
Yeah.
writing,
Yeah.
is that sort of okay? Yeah. I don't know if I'm in the minority with this, but I'd sort of just kind of let it go, let it flow in. And if a piece ends up being about teaching, in a sense, obviously I'm not putting student names or something in there like that.
Sure.
Breach of confidentiality or anything, but. I've definitely had, while teaching up in front of people, I've had poems come into my head while teaching.
Oh, and that reminds me of the Spark Notes poem that you had on there, and I checked that one out. That was such a great moment that you captured there, because it is a constant reminder. I imagine you see this every day in the classroom of folks who just, we need the now. We need this, especially in the world that we live in. Things are moving so quickly. What do we have to learn about that? And can you tell me a bit about maybe using that poem as an example of how that comes to be in some of those lessons?
Yeah, totally. And that poem actually I wrote it during my lunch break, because the kid said that before lunch. And then like I said a second ago, a poem came flooding in, and my brain was thinking, oh, Spark Notes, and then somebody sort of like ruining the movie, in line or whatever. And then like, oh, photos are kind of like that. You look at a photo of a vacation destination, and then it sort of all flooded in like that. And I wrote it during my lunch break, basically. And then when it got published, I told the student, I said that poem that you sparked, got published today. And then he has to read it. And, I mean, he'd probably still visit Spark Notes, to be honest. But
yeah, but that's a beautiful thing too, because I know that sometimes, I don't know if this happens in educational settings at all, but there are some educators that I've had in the past who, like maybe in high school, and this was a while back, who were very much like, I am an author in my private life, and that doesn't make its way into my classroom. And maybe that's why I wanted to ask you this, because there's folks who feel like, I'm not going to influence the classroom with the work that I'm doing outside of the classroom. And I don't know if that's something that doesn't seem to be a concern that you have, because you're very open, and I think that's a very healthy thing to do. But what are your thoughts on that? How do you think that a student who knows that you're a published author, who you're out there hustling, making your own thing happen, how do you think that affects folks who are just starting, who might be interested in that?
Yeah, I think that I've had a pretty decent reception with it, actually. I've definitely, I don't stand up in front of the room and say, here's the Amazon link, go buy my book or something. But like, I've definitely, introduced it as part of myself. I don't know if it adds a sense of credibility. I'm not sure, but it adds another layer of interest. And I think it adds another sort of like personal thing maybe the students can sort of grasp onto. And I've definitely had some that have read the books and have forwardly told me they've read the books, and a couple of them, you ask them, oh, what was your favorite piece or this or that? And they'll say, I like the whole thing, and they won't give you the whole, the whole deal, the whole nitty gritty that you want or whatever. But,
sure.
I'm actually currently teaching a creative writing class. I think it's like the first time we've had an English elective at the school in like a long time.
Mm.
I've got a bunch of students signed up for it, and we sort of talk about like this stuff all the time,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I'll use myself as an example, but then I'll also use, I don't want to say more credible, but like say like more widely known people also.
Mm-hmm.
And like
Yeah.
we're reading like parts of On Writing by Stephen King and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that, you know. And then I'll pull whatever it is, excerpts from interviews and stuff like that from other authors,
Mm-hmm.
about process oriented stuff or whatever.
Sure.
So I mean, especially in that context, I think it helps a little bit, that they know that I'm actually somebody that, I'm not just preaching the concept of, oh, go and write your thing, like I actually do.
Yeah.
And I've shown them some work and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
In the context of say like a 10th grade English class or something, I've definitely brought it up there too, and say use the Spark Notes poem a couple times, if it seems like people are veering in that direction. I won't throw any names out there or anything, but just kind of talk about it and that sort of thing. And I've done I used to do it more frequently, but like an indie spotlight, kind of like people maybe you don't know, and sort of spotlight their work. And we did a student generated questionnaire, and I contacted people from Twitter and talked to them and said, hey, do you want to fill out this questionnaire for me, and we can read one of your pieces in class and this and that. And the students really seemed to like it. Just people I had read on Twitter that probably nobody had ever heard of before, unless they were following them on Twitter, in a sense. But the work is, just as good as anybody else that has sold, 1 million books or whatever the case might be,
Yeah. And that's what I appreciate about the way that you're approaching this, is that you're offering an alternative to what younger generations or most people think success is as a writer. I mean, for me, what you're doing is success as a writer. And I want to emulate that. I respect that so much, because it's not just about getting the notoriety. It's about creating something that connects with people. And let's talk about Twitter for a moment, though, because
sure, yeah.
it is such a cesspool, and I hate it, but I love it so much because there's so much heart in it. There's so much good there. So what are your thoughts on Twitter? What has it given you personally? And where do we go from here now that it's kind of a tainted place to be?
Yeah, I don't know. I still swear that I get less interactions than I did before the blue check thing happened, because I haven't paid for it. But I don't know if that's actually the case. Like, I don't want to spread rumors or anything, but like it just seems that way to me. But I never thought that I would have, writing intersect with social media. And I don't know if I was just this like, uninformed, whatever, 30 something, that thought, okay, I'm just gonna, write something and just send it, and then everybody's gonna love it. And I'm not gonna have to, do the whole,
I don't want to talk to people.
talk to people about it, but then the first acceptance I got, which was like, it was the first day my Twitter was set up. I think it was like February 8th or something, 2021. February 8th, 2021 was when the first acceptance came in. And they said right in the email, they said, send us your Twitter handle. And I was like, I showed my wife, I said, look, I got an acceptance. And she was like, that's awesome. And I was like, they said, send me your Twitter handle. And I was like, I'm not on Twitter, but I guess I am now. And then that was sort of the thing. And then I didn't even know how to use it for like a long time. So I just followed a couple magazines that had published me. So I had like, 3 or 4 people I followed and like 5 people that followed me or whatever. And then it was this really weird thing where I wasn't like interacting with anybody for like a couple months. And then I finally got like how it worked and stuff. And then sort of sought out people in magazines and stuff to follow.
Right.
It's sort of embarrassing, but like it was really weird. I mean, I feel like I owe a lot to Twitter. And I have a a writing group. Well, we haven't done the writings for a little while, but like we have like a group chat, and it's people like all over the world basically, and we just talk about writing. And we had these writing workshops where we do prompts and readings and stuff like that, and it was really cool to sort of have a kinship with people that might be, in a completely different time zone. There was somebody from Australia and somebody from Indonesia and somebody from England and Ireland and, East Coast US, West Coast US, all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
Japan.
Yeah.
It was really cool, and to see sort of like that common interest and sort of common goal of getting your work out there and doing what you love and stuff like that. So I've really seen a pretty positive side of Twitter, I think. And I think I try to keep it positive on my end too. And that's sort of my goal in a sense, with life in general, try to keep it pretty positive. Some of my coworkers call me sunshine. So, I try to keep it positive. And, whenever I read this year, I'm trying to post every time I read a book. So I'll post like the cover or whatever, and I'll post a little information about it or whatever. But the past couple of years, I've been trying to, anytime I buy a book from somebody on Twitter, I'll try to sort of like post a, oh, look what came sort of thing, help people out if I
Right.
can.
Yeah.
But so it's been pretty positive for me, but I definitely feel like, let's say like the hits and stuff are a little less frequent now without the blue check, but that might be my own fault for not paying X amount for it.
Ah, man. Well, it ends up being a racket in some respects, but you're doing everything you can. We're doing everything we can to keep the community alive and well.
Yeah.
And lastly, here, I am digressing just a moment to wrap it up here with two questions. But what do you, what have you been influenced by, or what are you enjoying now in terms of art or entertainment that is really driving you to the page to keep creating and continuing to nourish you creatively?
Oh, geez. That's a great question. Because I feel like I read, I feel like I read pretty widely. I mean, if you look at my posts from this year, I mean, I don't know if it's as wide as I'd want it to be, but I feel like I read pretty widely.
You can go back too. If you want to go to like seminal works or like big stuff that inspired you when you were younger too. I mean, I'm down for those too.
Yeah, I mean, I just always found a drive to write. And I don't know if that started with like R.L. Stein, you know what I mean? For so many
Mm.
people, it did, I think,
Yeah.
with like Goosebumps and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I always just like love those books, and I even got like an award in 8th grade for being like the Goosebump aficionado or something when I was younger, like in 5th
Nice.
grade or 6th
Nice.
grade or whatever. And then of course, Stephen King, like, I always mention him, like anytime I talk about, influence, even though I don't really feel like I write like him, but like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, he's really made like, I mean, or sustained, I think like a generation of readers. I feel like a lot of people probably wouldn't read if they didn't read him, in a sense, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, fortunate that people do read him, but
Mm-hmm.
unfortunate that, they don't pick up a whole bunch of stuff too at the same time.
Right.
But yeah, so I think those two have sort of carried me for a while. It's so interesting. Some of the authors that I'd always heard of and never picked up really. I've enjoyed a lot of their stuff this
Mm-hmm.
year. Like, read a lot of like Vonnegut this year, and I feel
Mm.
like his sort of like, in a sense, like sarcastic, dark humor on like difficult topics is pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it like really is like my work at all, really, but like, I find that pretty interesting. I feel like a lot of my recent work is just inspired by sort of like the terrible stuff going on in the world. I don't
Yeah. Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
short attention spans, and of course like pandemic and all that sort of stuff. I don't know, it's just so interesting.
Absolutely.
And then there'll be some days where I'll just be driving home and just the sun will catch, the clouds the right way or something, and then that'll inspire something somehow.
Yeah.
I just feel like it's out of the blue sometimes. It's so interesting.
No, that's awesome, man. I appreciate that. And lastly, I would like to know, and we've talked about this in some respects, but I'd like to hear it from in your words. How do you quantify success? What is success as a writer to you? And what are some challenges that you're taking on this year for your craft?
Yeah, that's really good. Because I feel like I'm a very goal oriented person in general. And I feel like, that's something that at least the last couple of years I've consciously like, written down, New Year's resolutions, whether it's writing related ones, whether it's whatever. And I actually posted a couple on Twitter, I think, too, for writing and reading, sort of, like goals, I guess you could call them. I mean, I guess we can start with the success thing, though. I mean, I think like someone's idea of the idea of success is shifting, I guess, in my mind. Like I said, initially, you think you're just going to write something and like every single person that's going to read it is going to be like, wow, this is like the best thing ever. And then getting that, first rejection, I was like, oh, maybe everybody will think that it's going to be terrible. I'm not sure, and then fortunately I picked the pen back up or keyboard or whatever. And, started plugging away again, because I feel like, some of the things I feel like are the most meaningful are the conversations that I have with people around work, whether it's around, my work. I mean, I guess that's my favorite because it's about my work and they're commenting on it, and then I can comment back and talk to them about it and all that sort of stuff. Or even about their work and I comment on it and then we sort of have a conversation, or, say like one of the books I posted this year that I've read and somebody says, oh, have you tried this one by them? And then we get into a little spin-off about that or whatever. So I feel like, success looks like that to me, like somebody being able to make a connection to my work, or coming up to me. I've had even a couple like teachers and substitute teachers and students and stuff come up and say, I really like that piece. Where'd you come up with that piece? You should make that longer and make that into a movie. I'd watch that movie. That's really cool. Stuff like that, just like, even if it's like a brief conversation, you sort of make that kind of like personal connection for somebody, and somebody sort of like, in a sense, gets what you're doing. Yeah. And even if it's not the exact same way you thought it out, if it can be perceived that way, that's kind of like art in general. You don't really always want one interpretation. That's why I tell students all the time with literature. I say, this isn't math class. You don't have to give me the same answer. You don't have to give me the SparkNotes answer. Give me what's in your brain, Tell me what you think about the piece, and then we can go from there. The worst comes to worst, I can just twist it, and then it sounds like you're a genius anyways, But some of my goals this year, one of them was to sort of like curate another collection. Whether I actually send it out or not, I'm not sure yet. Another one of my goals was to actually write something longer, sort of like one piece, whether it ends up being like novel length or whatever. Said I wanted to write one longer piece at least, right? So right now I'm thinking that the one that I'm writing currently, I don't know, I think it might land around 40,000 words. It might be a little shy of that, I'm not sure. But so I'm like a little over halfway through or so. So I think, I think the goals are going pretty well. I definitely have not submitted frequently at all this year because a lot of the creation has been embedded in that one longer piece, which I'm fine with. So I'm going to have less posts on Twitter. I'm going to have less people seeing kind of like new stuff in a sense from me, but that's fine because I think, one of my goals this year, like I said, was to do something a little bit more sustained. I mean, because that was always sort of what I gravitated toward, like I said, in, high school. And then even, I wrote something that was about 30,000 words or so, like a novella or whatever. And that sort of has been on the back burner for a while. Second, third draft, whatever. So that's floating out there. So maybe when I finish this one, I'll go back and retool that one or something too. So, I mean, even as the year progresses, I'm sort of, adapting my goals too, because I feel like the writing process of this one has actually gone pretty quickly. I thought the longer piece might take a little longer, because I'd been so ingrained in the short stuff for so long, but it's actually been pretty smooth transition, actually.
That's great, man. That's wonderful to hear. Well, man, I think this has been a wonderful time, and I know that we just scratched the surface with a lot of these conversations, but I want to thank you for the work that you're doing as a writer. You are creating these wonderful moments and worlds that I really can't wait to start digging in a little bit more in some of the offerings that you already had on your link tree, and I'm going to put all that stuff in the episode description so folks check it out. But also, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing as an educator and reminding the younger generations to take their time to process and think about what they're doing, and really leading through example by example and letting them know that there is a way to incorporate art and these beautiful things that we love so much into any facet of life and class, no matter where you are, you can still have a part of this art be, in your life. So you're awesome, man. I really appreciate it. And I hope that we get to chat sometime down the road.
Awesome. That sounds great. Yeah, this was great. You asked some really good questions, and I always appreciate these things. I was just saying this to my creative writing students the other day. Any chance you can get to connect with somebody, being able to reflect on your own work, or talk about their work, or whatever the case might be. It's just cool. It's just really interesting.
Awesome.
Because everybody comes with a different set of thoughts, and then that might spark something different, and then sort of spinning the wheel, right?
That's right. We got to keep that wheel going. But
right.
Yeah, thanks, man, so much for the rescheduling and everything. But I hope that we get to chat down the road on the internet, okay?
Cool. That sounds great. Looking forward to it.
All right. Have a wonderful Sunday. Talk soon.
Yeah, you too. See you later.
Bye.